Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary, where today we continue working on our Vampire Survivors clone featuring Candy. Now, last time we continued cloning more weapons from Vampire Survivors into our game. These included weapons such as the Lancet, Water, Thunder, and Boomerang-like Cross. While most felt like their original counterparts, there was still a level of uncertainty that kinda comes with trying to recreate a game mostly based on look and feel, and a mildly helpful wiki. In other words, we've got a lot of tweaking to do in the future, but today, in a feeble attempt to keep pace with Vampire Survivors, we're continuing to add more weapons. But first, an update to the Garlic code. Two global functions were created. The first checks an array for a specific ID value and returns the results, both of which are provided via argument. The second function clears all entries in the specified array and resizes it back to 0. And finally, the third function is a global function used to damage a target enemy. These functions would be necessary for weapons such as the Garlic, which I learned from a previous episode only hurts enemies once per cooldown, so an array was added to the Garlic weapon struct. Then the three new global functions are used to first determine if an enemy has already taken damage from the Garlic item. If not, it's added to the array and ignored until the refresh happens. The refresh then calls the global array reset function, allowing the process to repeat itself. Now, it's hard to tell because all our weapons are basically overpowered right now, but the code works and can be tweaked later if something does in fact go wrong. With that said, however, the Garlic is not the only thing that has received an update. As mentioned in a previous video, I wanted to streamline a lot of the code that repeats itself, and so I did. Commonly used code for amount checks, amount resets, and general cooldown timers have all been made into separate functions. And as you're about to see, this greatly simplifies the addition of new weapons. So the first new weapon added this session was the Fire Wand. And funny enough, the Fire Wand, which required special checks to pick an enemy at random, does not use any of the new code we just added, mostly due to simply needing it to spawn enough fireballs in the direction of a random enemy per cooldown. Arguably the most simple of all the weapons so far. Now the next weapon added was the Axe. And the spawn code tries to emulate the Axe's behavior as best as I understand it, with the first axe being tossed straight up and the subsequent axes being tossed at angles. The ticker function for this one is a prime example of the new code in action and just how simple the process has become. The general timer is kept track of during the inactive phase, while the active phase begins spawning the axes, and keeps spawning them until the max amount of axes has been spawned. As for the axe projectile itself, it works very similarly to the cross, only it works vertically. Based on its current state, the axe is either moving in an up or downward motion, all the while moving at a horizontal speed, giving it the illusion of an arc. Again, much like the cross, it doesn't exactly feel quite right, and as a result is going to need another pass. However, it felt similar enough to move on. The next weapon added was the Bone. Again, the code is very similar to the axe, and in fact, this will be a common sight for most projectile-based attacks moving forward. The same timer and amount checks are made, initiating the projectile creation code when necessary. Much like the axe, majority of this weapon's behavior comes in the projectile object itself. As I understand it, the Bone projectile basically bounces off of anything it collides with, which is exactly what's been coded, meaning the Bone is only despawned once its timer has expired. Again, this one feels familiar, but I'm not exactly sure if it stacks up to the original's code. I don't know if I'm missing any nuance, but it felt good enough to move on. Now, the Rune Tracker felt like a greatest hits type of addition. Not only does it use the same setup to spawn axes and bones, but it also uses the global functions to keep track of the enemies it's already hit. Now, according to the wiki, the rune can be reset based on other activation resets. However, since all projectiles are basically independent, runes won't reset prematurely. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing is yet to be determined, but it is a notable difference. It's entirely possible that in the future, to help performance, we may need to tie all activations to a single trigger, but for now our rune bounces happily and independently. So the final weapon added this week is the King Book. Another simple setup where the books are spawned based on a timer, which itself is based on how many books need to be spawned for the sequence, the math of which separates the books evenly by the end of said sequence. And the projectile's behavior for this one is also pretty simple. Each book follows the player's position, orbiting until its time runs out. Now, as proud as I am of this one, mostly for the math, I'm again uncertain if it's accurate. mostly due to the math. I'm not exactly sure of the timing of a book's lifespan, especially in relation to the overall attack cooldown. I may be able to figure it out once actual proper times are applied, but for now it's been difficult to find a sweet spot where overall attack time and spawning books with proper lifespans meet. But regardless of my concerns, this is a very productive step forward. Streamlining was a very good idea, and looking at the code now, I probably could streamline things even further, like simplifying things down to single lines of code maybe. However, as I realized, sometimes weapons behave outside of certain parameters, which could complicate things, especially with a lot of the newer stuff being added recently, which again will no doubt further date this video by the time it's released. But I'm already so far behind, it's really not a worry anymore. I'm really excited to see how these changes hold up in the future, so future editions, including those new weird weapons, should be interesting. But for now, this brings us to the end of today's dev diary. So if you enjoyed today's entry, consider leaving a like. Be sure to also subscribe and hit that bell if you haven't already, and let me know how you feel about today's additions. Anything need to be tweaked or that I outright missed or messed up? Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.